Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and it's time for another episode of the Chaos Dwarf Q&A. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first question, which the starting question for today is, considering the size of the Chaos Dwarf Empire against their relatively small population, how do the Dawi Zharr maintain control over all that territory? They don't, simply. We've spoken about this quite a bit in the last episode, but essentially the Dawi Zharr really only control small pockets of the Darklands centered around their outposts. That wasteland is just truly impossible for anyone to legitimately control in a meaningful way. The Chaos Dwarfs are just too arrogant to admit it. And then the last question for this particular section, because I actually missed these two questions somehow, I just skimmed over them, I suppose, is this is for Chaos Dwarfs Worldwide. This question is, if one were to simply walk up to the Gates of Zharr Naggrund, could you describe what the visual experience would be? What about the other outposts? So, for this particular question, I'm actually going to read a passage to you guys verbatim that revolves around Zharr Naggrund, which normally I wouldn't do, but I think in this instance, I think if I was ever going to do it, this is the perfect time to do it. So, please enjoy. The Tower of Zharr Naggrund lies at the center of the Chaos Dwarf Empire, and is the object of all their labors and enterprise. Though there are numerous mines, workshops, foundries, and fortresses throughout the plain of Zharr and beyond, there is just one mighty city in all the Empire. The Tower of Zharr Naggrund is built of obsidian, black volcanic glass whose light reflects the flames of the myriad furnaces that burn both day and night. The entire city is built in a series of tall steps, like a ziggurat, each step hundreds of feet high and surrounded by battlements that jut upwards like a row of ugly fangs. Each step is square, and the bottom step is pierced by 4 huge stone gateways bound in iron. The gates are almost as high as the walls and massive beyond any obvious need. From the east and west gateways, roads paved with slabs of gold and brass lead to the Mountains of Morn and the Darklands. The north and south gateways are the river sluices, through which the waters of the River Ruin pour. The cold river enters the city from the north and is put to use cooling the huge forges of the Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers, powering the steam-driven engines and flushing the effluent of industry out to the south. Where it leaves the city, the river is stained red and yellow with filth, laden with noxious sediments, and its steaming water is thick and poisonous. A foul yellow cloud hangs about the river, and its banks are choked with drifts of spectacularly covered pollutants. 1,000 massive furnaces burn within the vastness of Zharr Naggrund, smelting the metals that are the lifeblood of the city. The city is a huge living workshop, full of smoke and noise, illuminated by its inner fires and driven by machines of vast size and power. Gigantic steam-driven hammers stamp out sheets of iron and bronze with rhythmic booms, like the heartbeats of a cyclopean god. Massive cauldrons of bubbling metal pour out their molten contents into twisted molds of intricate construction. The roaring of furnaces, groaning of huge wheels, and grinding of arcane machines fills the oily air. The noise and the labors never cease. The Darklands are shrouded in thick volcanic clouds and smoke from the workshops of Zharr, so the Tower of Zharr Naggrund exists in a timeless twilight, illuminated by the carmine fires of its own forges. At the pinnacle of the city is the Temple of Hashut, the bull-shaped god of the Chaos Dwarfs, who they call the Father of Darkness. His temple is guarded by bull centaurs, creatures mutated from Chaos Dwarfs long ago. They have the body of a bull but the torso of a Chaos Dwarf, with long, snaggly tusks and exotically curled beards. Inside the temple, its guardians perform bloodthirsty rites, throwing captives into cauldrons of molten metal to the echoing laughter of the assembled Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers. On top of the temple stands the iron statue of Hashut. Its hollow iron belly contains a furnace heated by coals so that the statue glows red hot, and anyone who touches its surface suffers searing wounds. The god is the embodiment of the city, its deity and its master, whose power flows through the Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers, and for whom thousands of slaves are sacrificed by fire and furnace. Hopefully that gives enough of a painted mental image to give you an idea of what to expect if you were to approach Gates of Zharr Naggrund. As for the other places, I'll make sure the editor includes some art here, but we actually do have artwork of the Black Fortress. So, yeah, they're all pretty nasty, spooky-looking places, kind of reminiscent of Mordor from Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. Anyway, that is the end of the Chaos Dwarfs worldwide, so we are now moving on to Chaos Dwarf biology and anatomy. Do Chaos Dwarfs have a lower birth rate than regular dwarfs? What is their rough population? The Chaos Dwarfs seem to have a very similar birth rate when compared to the Dawi of the Karazhamkor, but benefit instead from suffering far less casualties. The dwarfs are essentially under endless siege from greenskins, Skaven, and worse, while the Chaos Dwarfs are very rarely attacked by anything that causes them any major concern. Plus, they're more than happy to send out Hobgoblins and have designed their entire culture and arsenal of war to deal with invaders and hordes of enemies from afar. Even killing off a single regiment of Chaos Dwarfs is incredibly difficult for enemies to accomplish, unless it is just a truly titanic or deadly foe, such as when Tarmakon came through and roughed them up a bit. The rough population of the Chaos Dwarfs is speculated to be somewhere in the tens of thousands. There are not that many of them, though their population has been steadily increasing over the last few thousand years. I mean, it's actually noted that there's only a few hundred members of the priesthood of Hashut, meaning that the Sorcerer-Prophets and their Demon Smith acolytes combined. Not a ton, but hot damn do they wield a truly shocking amount of might considering their numbers. Our next question is, can Chaos Dwarfs ascend into Demon Princes or some sort of elevated form? No. The Chaos Dwarfs are quite resistant to mutation, especially after birth, and rarely gain additional mutations throughout their lives. The only transformation that tends to occur with them is petrification caused by the Sorcerer's Curse, which is much more of a bad thing. The closest thing to a Demon Prince would probably just be the Bull Centaurs. They do mutate a bit over their lives with how their flesh functions, and that they become more like a living metal as opposed to being a truly flesh and blood creature. But that's not really what you're asking. The short answer is just no. The only thing in the Chaos Dwarf society that is a Chaos Dwarf and seems to grow in power and in a physical sense over time are the Bull Centaurs. So maybe the closest thing would be like the mightiest top dog of the Bull Centaur Taruks. But no, they do not have the ability to ascend to demonhood. Next question. What is the Chaos Dwarf's height relative to their ancient cousins? What about their strength? What are the major differences when it comes to physiology? Actually, honestly, they're pretty much the same for all intents and purposes. The only major difference is that all Dawi Zharr tend to rate a bit better on the resistance to fire scale of things, but everything else is pretty much just cosmetic or personality related. You know, even the mutations tend to be mostly cosmetic ones, but we've covered all of those already. But yeah, from like a physicality perspective or physiology, they're virtually the same as regular dwarfs, just very different from, due to mutations and stuff. What is the average lifespan of the Dawi Zharr? It's pretty much the same as their distant cousins, probably somewhere in the ballpark of 500 years. But the Sorcerer-Prophets and other members of the Priesthood of Hashut may be immortal. It's not exactly clear until at least the Sorcerer's Curse gets them, or a violent death. I have not seen any records of a member of the Priesthood of Hashut dying naturally, and in Warhammer Fantasy, it is not unusual for sorceress individuals to be able to extend their lives by a very notable margin. That's a super common thread throughout Warhammer Fantasy, is that if a race has wizards, usually the wizards can live substantially longer than everybody else. So I would speculate that the Sorcerer-Prophets and the Demon Smiths very well could be immortal. Now, there's no strict evidence to that, and it doesn't seem like any of the original Priesthood of Hashut is still alive, like the actual dwarfs that came out of Uzkalak, but we do know that the oldest among them, Astrogoth Ironhand, is well over 1,000 years old. I would genuinely be shocked if he was less than like 2,000 years old. He is ancient. But, yeah. Are the Chaos Dwarfs still resistant to magic like their ancient cousins? No. They seemed to have sacrificed their innate resistance to magic during their bargain with Hashut, and that overwhelming corruptive chaos energies that surges through their bodies has long since worn away the stalwart magic resistance the Chaos Dwarfs once possessed. And then our last question for this section: could a Chaos Dwarf ever disguise themselves realistically as a normal dwarf? Absolutely not. The tusks alone would give them away instantly, and they'd be lucky if that was their only mutation. Their sickly ash-gray skin and distinct odor would also give them away to almost any Dawi right away, as the dwarfs have much keener senses than mere men like us, especially when it comes to smell. And that is a quick wrap for the body section, or physiology. So it is now time to move on to Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers / Magic. Our first question: can the stone curse upon Sorcerer-Prophets be cured? No. Once a Chaos Dwarf loses part of themselves to the curse of Hashut, it cannot be undone by any means. The best thing they can do is to use sorcery and engineering to create mechanical parts that help them move around, to basically make up for their lack of mobility. Next, what winds of magic do the Chaos Dwarfs use? How does their own unique lore work? The Chaos Dwarfs can wield the battle lores, meaning the 8 basic winds, of fire, metal, and death. They also can use the unique lore of Hashut, which is an utterly devastating lore of magic that revolves around unleashing horrific amounts of fiery death and debilitating any enemies unfortunate enough to be caught out by it. This includes exploding magma from the earth, calling down storms of flammable ash, and snuffing out the will of foes with the tyrannic might of Hashut. The lore is quite straightforward, the lore of Hashut, being mostly a corruption of the Wind of Fire, heavily mixed in with dark magic and just a pinch of the Wind of Death to bring in those crucial soul-crushing spices. What can be said about how Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers turn to stone? How many have done so? So the process of the Curse of Hashut, or the Curse of Stone, the Sorcerer's Curse, whatever you want to call it, it's a fairly slow one, as it doesn't happen very often, only occurring when the Hellsmith in question loses control of the powers they're wielding. Generally, the process works from the ground up, so most Chaos Dwarfs will have their feet turned to stone, then their legs, then their hands, etc. They can survive this process, and if anything, will just become tougher because of it. But run into immediate trouble when it starts impacting their internal organs. The Sorcerer's Curse, which is its most popular name, is also a tad random. There's no guarantee it will simply work its way straight up. One may find they lose an arm or part of their face instead of the more predictable whatever the next thing is to go off in ascending order. The absolute worst case scenario is if the sorcerer's heart turns to stone, as that is just immediate instant death. Over the centuries, many of the priesthood of Hashut have lost themselves to this curse, as they attempt to unleash powers they cannot control. Many would-be creators of Kadai, infernal items, or mighty war machines have met their ends this way. Those who fall to the curse will eventually become made of stone entirely, and their bodies will be taken to line the stairs that lead up to the Temple of Hashut, so that they might forever watch over those who would dare approach the seat of their god. That being said, an interesting fact is that most of those petrified hellsmiths enshrined in such a way aren't actually dead. These unfortunate souls are simply trapped, as only their flesh and bones turn to stone instead of their internal organs. So they are trapped and stuck, fully aware and conscious, but unable to do anything but silently scream as the centuries pass by. Not a great way to go. Next up, what is the most powerful spell the Chaos Dwarfs can unleash? The mightiest spell available to the Chaos Dwarfs that we know of is known as the Flames of Asgore. A difficult spell to cast even for a master. If unleashed, this incantation will cause fire to leap from the sorcerer's eyes and mouth as he summons the full essence of destruction and flame. Moments later, the point on the battlefield that he desires will crack open as an immense column of boiling magma explodes upwards with incredible pressure. This geyser is more than capable of instantly incinerating all but the absolute mightiest of monsters, able to kill the likes of giants, dragons, and chaos mammoths in an instant, and dealing absolutely devastating damage to anyone nearby. You could kind of think of it like a vortex spell, but if you're caught in the center, it's pretty much instant death, unless it's just something obscenely tough, like a particularly durable Dreadsaurian or one of the really big idols of Gork. Thankfully, the Flames of Asgore requires just an insane amount of winds of magic to manifest, so it's rare to see it go off, but if you see that thing coming, you need to get the hell out of the way, especially because its range or targeting is generally only limited by where the Sorcerer-Prophet in question can see. And then the last question for this section: how are the Chaos Dwarfs able to cast magic considering innate dwarfen magic resistance? So all dwarfs technically have the ability to cast magic if they so wished, but doing so comes at a great risk due to how the old ones shaped them. Their innate magical resistance occurs as the dwarfen race is naturally attuned to the earth, allowing them to harmlessly ground sorcery that would otherwise affect them. However, this means that if they attempt to take magic into themselves and control it to make a spell, should any of the magic slip free, it will result in petrification, as the winds course through their body in its attempt to escape. That's why the regular dwarfs use implements like runic hammers and tools to runecraft, so that the magic's coursing through all of that material instead of the dwarf's body itself. The Chaos Dwarfs very simply consider the reward worth the risk, and Hashut has taught them much arcane lore, which allows them to mitigate the odds of the curse occurring. Not to mention that from their point of view, it's simply a matter of skill and having Hashut's favor. So long as you're not weak, you probably won't lose control of your magic and miscast. But even if you should, the process will only make you stronger, unless of course Hashit no longer favors you, in which case your heart will turn to stone and you'll die instantly. So, you know, they have a kind of a... The Chaos Dwarfs as a whole race are definitely a folk that consider a little bit of danger worth massive profit. That's going to be it for the sorcery and spell section. So let's keep on trucking. Alright, and the last subsection that we will be diving into today, though it's not the last one that we're doing for the series, let's talk Hobgoblins. The first question that we're going to answer is, do the Hobgoblins ever venture into the old world? What's the furthest west they've traveled? Do any non-Chaos Dwarf allied tribes ever venture through the Darklands? So we're just kind of talking about the Hobgoblins as a race, not necessarily purely as part of their Chaos Dwarf affiliation. So the only reason, pretty much ever, that the Hobgoblins come west is as a part of an army sent out by the Chaos Dwarfs. The furthest west I have found records of the Hobgoblins going was during the invasion of Tarmakon, which tore through the border princes before cutting through Winterteeth Pass into the Empire to assault the province of Wizenland. Now, there's a good chance that Hobgoblins, you know, are part of the Chaos Dwarf naval fleets, and therefore have popped up maybe further west as part of that. You know, maybe they've attacked Bretonnia or been to Lustre or what have you, but it would always just be as a part of the Chaos Dwarfs armies. As for the proper Hobgoblin legions, like the armies that live up on the eastern steppes and are not associated as much with the Chaos Dwarfs, they have never been sighted west of the World's Edge Mountains, at least in the records we have available. This does make sense, as being so incredibly far to the east, it would be much easier for the Hobgoblins to invade either Grand Cathay, End, the Mountains of Morn, or attack the forces of Chaos when they build up enough strength to sweep out and assault the nations of the world. Coming this far west to enter the old world would just introduce a massive amount of issues, as just getting past the World's Edge Mountains means coming through a narrow pass at some point, and neither the dwarfs or greenskins would tolerate such an invasion lying down. Likely, if they came so far to the west, every orc and goblin who caught wind of the Hobgoblins coming by would immediately rally up to go crump them backstabbed gits before they even had a realistic chance to strike the rich lands of the Empire or beyond. So frankly, it's just way too hostile territory. The Hobgoblins do not have any friends in the west, and even their relationship with the Chaos Dwarf Empire is very tenuous when it comes to the actual, like, Hobgoblin Khanates. They are not super fond of the Chaos Dwarfs for good reasons. The non-allied tribes of the Chaos Dwarfs, they very rarely ever come down into the Darklands, with the one exception is if they are bored or desperate enough to be looking for work. With the Dawi Zharr, they can kind of sign up with them as Hobgoblin Wolf Riders, because something that's actually worth noting is that the Hobgoblin Wolf Riders are usually not the actual Hobgoblin slaves that the Chaos Dwarfs keep around. Which Hobgoblins in the Chaos Dwarf Empire are essentially slaves, but they're like the highest tier of slave, and they get to bully around everybody else. Which makes the Hobgoblins much more happy with their position because they like to be on top of the crap pile, even though they're still in the crap pile. But the Khanates are much less tolerant of that, and just kind of like to roam and go where they like and where they please. You know, they are a nomadic people, and for them, sometimes a tribe that's desperate or bored will come down and work with the Chaos Dwarfs and kind of take up a campaign for them as scouts. But it's not crazy common. It's fairly rare, and even then, whether there's just a lot of kind of maybes involved in that. But it does definitely happen. That's where the Wolf Riders come from. Of course, they do also like to come down to wage war on the Chaos Dwarfs from time to time. only the most daring or insane of the Hobgoblins would attempt to attack the Chaos Dwarfs, but it has happened in the past. The Dawi Zharr have made a very strong effort to try and convince the Hobgoblin Khanates that any such ploys against them is just a disastrous suicide campaign, and do their best to try and show that, we're super duper scary and it would be way easier for you to attack other targets further to the east or south or even north. The Chaos Dwarfs rely very heavily on intimidation tactics, because obviously if the Hobgoblin Khanates decided to just consistently keep attacking the Chaos Dwarfs endlessly, that would become a problem pretty quickly. There are, of course, we kind of already talked about it, but as I said, the big thing you're going to see with true non-allied Hobgoblins is they'll be showing up to function as Wolf Rider scouts for the Chaos Dwarfs who join up as mercenaries for a time. Next question. Considering how treacherous Hobgoblins are known to be, how do the Chaos Dwarfs keep them in line? The answer is that it's safe to say murder and terror are probably the most effective tools utilized. Hobgoblins are indeed treacherous creatures, all too happy to stab one another in the back and take any opportunity to tear each other down to serve their own desires. So they're already not exactly well equipped to threaten their Chaos Dwarf masters in any meaningful way. They can't form reliable groups. The Chaos Dwarfs like to feed into this paranoia and infighting by allowing the Hobgoblins certain privileges, such as being overseers of certain slave regions and other incentives that spark jealousy among them. Finally, if any Hobgoblin does start to gather a notable reputation or a good following, or acts in a way that may indicate they could become like a leader or troublesome, the Dawi Zharr will almost immediately butcher the Hobgoblin in question and stake out their skinned hide for all to see as a warning. It takes an incredibly careful and clever Hobgoblin to rise to the rank of Khan within the Empire of Hashut without getting himself killed from drawing too much attention in the process. And then the next question, this one's actually pretty quick. Do Hobgoblins have any kind of shaman? In the Chaos Dwarf Empire, no. They do not have any kind of playable shaman. But I personally do not see how it would be possible that there are not shamans among the Hobgoblins of the Eastern Steppes. I would say it is very safe to assume among the free Hobgoblins that there are indeed Hobgoblin shamans. I can see why there are none in the Chaos Dwarf Empire, though, as the Dawi Zharr would immediately murder such reckless and dangerous individuals within their kingdom. You cannot control a shaman, especially if they have allegiance and are tied to Gork and Mork. That would not work out. Next question. Can the Hobgoblins start a WAAAGH? So, I'm going to assume you mean in the sense of an army and not the calling of an actual WAAAGH for the resulting explosion of violence. Hobgoblins cannot call a true WAAAGH because no other greenskin would ever be caught dead joining up with them, no matter how powerful and mighty their horde became. The racial hatred just runs way too deep. However, the Hobgoblins on the Eastern Steppes do have the capability of becoming their own WAAAGH. Essentially, if another were to rise and claim the legendary mantle of the Great Khan among the Hobgoblins. The first Hobgoblin was said to lead an army so horrifically immense that it stretched from horizon to horizon and completely devastated the lands east of the Old World long ago. The Empire of Grand Cathay, the lands of End, perhaps even as far south as the jungles of Koresh and the mountains of Morn, but all of those lands and east of the World's Edge Mountains apparently had a very hard time dealing with the the armies united under the Great Khan. And there's only been one Great Khan. The Hobgoblins are trying to, get another one working. But so far, he has yet to appear. And that's going to be the end of today's episode. Thank you all so much for watching. We will continue next time with more Hobgoblin questions. And then the only sections we have left after finishing the Hobgoblins is the Warfare and Tactics section, and then the grand finale, Hash It. So I hope you're all looking forward to those. We are nearing the end of this series. It has been wonderful, and I'll see you all for the next episode. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye.